What's up, my friend? Abby here, and welcome back to Writer's Life Wednesdays, where we come together to help you make your story matter and make your author dreams come true. Today we're discussing something a little bit more publishing related, and that is how to line edit a novel. So I've done a few videos on editing before in the past on this channel. One was about revisions, my revision guide. One was about just all the different types of editing and what my editing process looks like in more detail. And one was side-by-side comparisons of my first draft versus my final draft. All of those videos are linked in the description box below this video, so you can check them out if you would like to, but today's video is about a very specific type of editing, and that is line editing. So every writer's editing process looks a little bit different, but here's what mine looks like in a nutshell. Finish writing the first draft, decompression time, so that's time where I don't look at my manuscript, I forget about it, 3 to 6 months of that. Then I make revisions, then comes my line editing process, and then pre-editor beta read, which is my mom. I'll talk about that later. Round 2 edits, proofread, and then the professional edit, post-editor beta read, which is 2 to 3 people, professional proofread, and then I am finished. The book is ready to go to the press. So today we're just gonna focus on the line editing part of that process. This is different from making revisions, okay? I've said that in other videos, but just to refresh our minds, this is the difference between revisions and line edits. Revisions are about strengthening your story, and line edits are about strengthening your prose and dialogue. So if your book was a house, revisions would be like changing the actual structure of the house and the layout, and line edits would be like paint color and interior design and furniture and all the stuff that you can see. You may have different definitions of those terms, but I just want you to know what I mean when I say them. Okay, so let's dive into it. Here's how I go through my manuscript with a fine-tooth comb and line edit like a boss.
Why does your story matter? Good question. What if I told you that there's a science behind every great story? I don't just teach you how to write. I teach you how to change the world with your story and make your author dreams come true.
Alright, so if you know me at all, you know that I'm a little bit obsessed with organization, and of course that carries over into my editing process. When I'm making revisions, I allow myself to be a little bit more messy, scribbling in the margins and making tons of notes, because that's kind of the stage where I'm still brainstorming ways to improve my story and strengthen the story itself. But after I strengthen my story to the best of my ability and then enter in all of my revisions and print off my manuscript again, I'm going to be a little bit more organized and orderly for my own sake when I go through and do my line edits. Because editing is frustrating enough as it is, okay? I don't want to make it even harder on myself by making a mess of my manuscript and not even being able to read what I wrote. So my first secret weapon is highlighters. I've mentioned this in previous editing videos, but highlighters are your best friend when you are editing. The red pen is also going to play a big role in this editing process, but I like to use highlighters as well as the red pen because there are some areas that I just want to highlight without making all these notes and making a mess of things. So I will set up a color key with my highlighters before I even start editing. Basically, there's a color for each problem area that I'll be watching out for, and these problem areas include, but are certainly not limited to, continuity errors, so random changes in details, passive voice or shallow point of view, anything that brings you out of the character's perception, character voice, if it's not consistent, I'll highlight the error and make a note, weak words, if I don't know how to replace a weak word, I'll just highlight it, and then spelling and grammar is something I'll catch with the red pen. So let's dig deeper into what these errors look like. First, continuity errors, or minor plot holes. So you shouldn't have any major plot holes after your revision process. But this is basically anything where a detail randomly, suddenly changes. Like your character has brown eyes in one scene and then green eyes in the next scene. Or they suddenly start wearing glasses halfway through the book with no explanation whatsoever. Or the location of their home changes, or even something as simple as time passing too quickly, or characters going from one place to another without explanation of how they got there. When I'm fixing continuity errors, I'll highlight the problem and write in how to resolve it. Keep in mind that continuity errors are difficult to catch, so this will be something to ask your beta readers about when you hand over your book for feedback. Someone who has never read your story before will be able to see all the minor plot holes that you might have missed. Okay, problem number 2 is passive voice and shallow point of view. I grouped these two things together because they're very similar and they both create the same problem, and that is taking your reader out of the character's mind. I actually made a whole video on how to write in deep point of view, which is the opposite of shallow point of view, so check that out for some of the most effective tips on writing in deep point of view. Basically, your goal with all of your prose is to make your reader feel like they are inside of the mind of the character, okay? So in order to do that, you have to cut out passive voice and filter words. Passive voice is kind of tricky to pinpoint sometimes. Here's an example. The door was opened by John. John opened the door. The first line is passive because it begins with the object of the sentence followed by the verb followed by the subject. And that's just weird. The second line is active because it begins with the subject followed by the verb and how the verb affects the object. The flow of subject, verb, object seems more active because it's how we observe most events in real life. Abbie makes writing videos, okay? Not writing videos are made by Abbie. Right? I'm no grammar expert, so you can learn more about subjects and verbs and all that good stuff online. Definitely try to get as much right as you possibly can, even if you're gonna be handing it over to a professional editor, because not only will that make it easier on the editor, but it'll make it easier on your bank account. So that is passive voice in a nutshell. Shallow point of view is similar, but it has more to do with filter words. I've talked about filter words before. I actually talked about them in that deep point of view video that I linked up there. So watch that video if you want a better explanation on filter words. But basically, filter words are anything that filters what the character is thinking, seeing, hearing, wondering, smelling through the words I see, I think, I hear, I wonder, I smell. Here's the list of filter words that I watch for every time I edit my novels. So feel free to take a screen capture right now or copy these down into a notebook. It's a super handy list to have, and you can just search your whole manuscript for these words in Scrivener or Microsoft Word, and that's a super easy way to find all of your filter words. And that kind of leads us to the next problem to watch for, and that is character voice. So I made a whole video a while ago about how to rock your character voice, 7 techniques that I use all the time to make my character voice shine. You can watch that video right here. But basically what you want is for all your characters to have voices that are unique to them, and you want those voices to stay consistent throughout the entire length of your novel. One of my favorite ways to keep track of this is to make a list for each of my point of view characters and write down their unique linguistic traits. So maybe one character uses a lot of metaphors, and maybe they always say, oh my god, when they're surprised, and maybe they have a lot of thoughts in parentheses. If I have one character doing these very specific stylistic things, I don't want any of my other characters to do that. That's this character's voice, okay? And those other characters need to have other unique traits about them that make their narrative unique. So having these lists of basically the ingredients in each of your characters' voices is super helpful for when you're line editing. So you want to make sure their voices stay consistent, and throughout the course of your novel, if you find that you were starting to do some unique things to each of these characters' voices as time went on, feel free to go back to the beginning of your novel and add some of those things back into the beginning to make it consistent throughout the entire novel. If I find something that is not consistent with the character voice, I will highlight the problem area with the right highlighter and write in the correction. Okay, problem number 4 is weak words. This is usually the only thing that you hear other writers talk about when they talk about editing. They're just like, oh yeah, cut out all those weak words. You gotta cut out those weak words, delete the weak words, kill your darlings, right? And yes, you do have to cut out some weak words, but what if I told you that not all weak words deserve to die? What if I told you that those weak words that you're mercilessly chopping out of your manuscript are actually appropriate in some cases. It's true, sometimes you should cut them, but sometimes you should keep them. I'm actually gonna make a whole video about this, okay? Not next week, but the week after probably. It will be like a super in-depth video on weak words, when to cut them and when to keep them, with examples from my own writing. So it'll be like kind of peeking over my shoulder and watching me tighten up my prose. And if you're from the future, the link to that video will be right there. And same rules apply here with the highlighters, okay? If I can't think of a stronger replacement for a weak word, I'll just highlight it and I will come back to it later when I enter my edits into my digital manuscript. And last but not least, spelling and grammar. This is definitely the most boring and tedious part of the editing process, but it has to be done. Your writing software will probably catch 90% of your spelling errors, but there's always a surprising number that slips through and can really only be caught with the human eye. I try to read really slowly when I'm looking for spelling errors, because it is unbelievable the amount of times that I have read a sentence like 100 times over and I never even see the totally obvious typo that's like sitting right in the middle of it. Like, please tell me I'm not the only one who experiences this. Grammar is a little bit trickier because, like I said, I'm not a grammar expert. I know I use em dashes way too much. Like, all of my manuscripts are just full of em dashes. Like, why use a period when you could use an em dash? Why use a comma when you could use an em dash? Why use a semicolon when you could use an em dash? I get a little too overzealous with my em dashes sometimes. So when I line edit, I try to take out a lot of the em dashes and replace them with the punctuation that most likely should go there instead, just so I don't drive my editor crazy. So maybe you have a punctuation fetish as well. If you do, comment below and tell me what it is, because I'd like to know that I'm not the only person who does this. But also keep that in mind when you're line editing, okay? Don't be sloppy with your grammar if you can help it. You don't have to be perfect, but you do show appreciation for your editor's time when you at least try to do your best. After I finish putting all of my edits into my manuscript and I enter them into the actual digital manuscript, I double check everything for passive voice and adverbs using the software Hemingway. I've talked about Hemingway in past videos. It's an awesome free software that helps you strengthen your writing by highlighting adverbs, passive voice, hard to read sentences, and convoluted words. It's also great for essay writing if that's something that you do a lot. So one chapter at a time, I'll put the novel into Hemingway and just see what pops up. I don't always change what Hemingway recommends I change, but I do carefully consider the areas it highlights, and having that extra artificial intelligence reviewing my work just challenges me to improve even more. Like I said in the beginning of this video, after I put all of the line edits into my digital manuscript, I'll print it off again for my first beta reader, which is my mom. And that might sound a little partial, but I assure you, in my case, it's not. Not only is my mom an amazing editor, but she is unapologetically honest with me when it comes to my writing, and she'll never tell me that something is good if it's not. I'm literally so lucky to have her. After she reads the manuscript and makes some edits of her own, I will make those changes and then read it all one last time before I send it off to my professional editor. But that being said, don't be surprised if your beta readers find things in your manuscript that sound weird. Even after you go through your novel with a fine-tooth comb, there will still be problem areas that need help. So be open-minded and be willing to listen to critiques. Try to detach from your writing, almost to the point of forgetting that you're the one who wrote it, okay? Because that's gonna be the only way you can look at it objectively. And looking at it objectively is key in order to make your writing the best it can possibly be. Okay, boom, that's it. That is my line editing process, start to finish. I hope it has helped you to just get a better idea of what to look for next time you line edit a story. Now, it's time for you to talk to me. Comment below and tell me, what does your editing process look like? Smash that like button if you liked this video, and be sure to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because I post writing videos and publishing videos every single Wednesday, and I would love to have you here in the community. Also, be sure to check out my Patreon, because that's where we go beyond videos and take storytelling to the next level. The Patreon community is not only the best way to support what I'm doing here on YouTube, but it's also the only way to connect personally with me and get better guidance on your story. So go to patreon.com/Abbie Emmons and check out all the awesome extra bonus content that I have over there for you. Until next week, my friend, happy editing and rock on. Do you ever have like a note in your manuscript that you literally cannot read because you were like in the dark or something when you wrote it, or you just have messy handwriting and you're like, oh my gosh, I hope that wasn't an important edit because I have no idea what it says?